Well, I want to welcome everyone here today. I'm Tommy Hinson, and I am not the pastor here. Actually, I'm the sub for the sub that's filling in. So I'm kind of third string, so just bear with me through all of this. But definitely want to welcome all those that are here, all those that could make it this morning, and any visitors we might have. Well, if not, if you can stand, please do so, and we'll start off with our opening hymn on page 600 or on our screens. Be seated, I believe. There is, I guess, just one thing I want to say with the passing of Jerry. It's hard to be up here at this time, but there's one thing I've always told Pam, my wife, that when I pass, there's one thing I wish people would say about me, and that's simply that he was a good man. And I can stand here and say that Jerry was a good man, and definitely going to be missed. And for me, I'm going to think about him for a long, long time. So. Okay, we'll do our Old Testament reading, which is Proverbs 9:10 through 12. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For through me your days will be many, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise, your wisdom will reward you. If you are a mocker, you alone will suffer. And our New Testament reading, which is Luke 8:10. The knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of God have been given to you, but to others I will speak in parables, so that through seeing they may not see, through hearing they may not understand. And we have our hymn of praise. Looks like it's page 70 or on the screen. If you would stand, please. I'm sorry. He hideth my soul. Yes, thank you. start with our scripture reading today, which is Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 through 29. Drop my pencil. And this is the wise and foolish builders. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teachings, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. So I will start my message now. First of all, I think most people would say, why is Tommy Hinson up there? He's the quiet one. And Pam's the one that talks all the time. I can say those things because she can't get to me while I'm up here. At least I hope not. I've got some notes here, and so I'm going to try to go by these. Sometimes I get a little off track, but I'll try to come back to it. And if I pause, that just means I'm trying to figure out where I'm at here. And I'm going to try not to read my notes, and I'll tell you why. It's because I don't read very well, and you've probably picked up on that as I've been reading the scripture here. But I was a little slow in school when it came to reading. I was pretty good in some areas like, PE and shop class and maybe FFA, but that was about it. I was one of those that had to be in the remedial reading class, but we got through it. So we read this parable, and I love this parable. I mean, it's a parable that you were taught as a child, It's one that you might have stood in front of the church when you were little and maybe sang the song about it, and the rains came down and all that. So it really, I think we've heard it from very young ages, and even as we get older, I think we continue to hear it, and it makes even more meaning for us. And I want to talk about some of that meaning today. So first of all, think about where Jesus was during his ministry at the time that he said this parable. Jesus was wrapping up his Sermon on the Mount, and if you remember the lessons through the Sermon of the Mount, sorry about that. As you can see, I'm an amateur. First was the Beatitudes. And do you know what chapters actually made up the Sermon on the Mount? 'Cause I didn't know a lot of this till I started studying, so it was good for me. But the Sermon on the Mount was actually, if you read through Matthew, it was chapters 5, 6, and 7. And the wise and foolish builders is at the end of chapter 7. So, as I said, he was wrapping up his Sermon on the Mount, and first came the Beatitudes in chapter 5. And I kind of want to run through some of that quickly so you understand what was leading up to what he said at the end of chapter 7 with the wise and foolish builders. But I'll be quick as I go through this. But the Beatitudes was like a framework, I would say. for Christians. I mean, it contained virtues and values for us to follow. And in following those virtues and values, I think it gives us a deep, deep connection with God. The challenge in the Beatitudes was really for us to accept and understand kind of a counterculture from what we see today, and what's emphasized in the world today. But just kind of going through those Beatitudes quickly, and you'll remember these as I go along, but blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be fulfilled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed in the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. So as Jesus started out with the Sermon on the Mount, he was attracting a lot of people. And not all the people that he was attracting were for Jesus. Some were trying to find fault in Jesus. And so, Jesus at times began talking with these parables because it had a deep connection with people that of that time that understood it. But the thing behind it was almost, in some ways, maybe hidden from some of those who couldn't understand it. But that's why he used parables, and it's basically, telling a story that we can relate to. And if you can relate to a story, it's easier to remember it and think back on it. A lot more so than just a lot of, facts, I would say. I got to thinking about parables, and I was thinking, sometimes us Southerners, we talk a little bit in some parables too. And I know this is not a parable, but this is what I thought about was, what's the first thing that us Southerners say that some others might not understand? Is bless your heart. And another one I thought about was, and the one that I really like a lot is, well, aren't you special? So anyway, that's kind of our parables of today maybe, but so Jesus talked about, or following on into chapter 5, Jesus talked about a few other things. The Sermon on the Mount, of course, and that was staying salty. And if you remember that, don't lose your salt. If you lose your saltiness, what good is that? Let's see. He talked about a few other things, of course. Murder, about the oaths that we have, eye for an eye. And he rounded out chapter 5 with love thy enemies. Now, how hard is that sometimes? I know for myself in my younger days, when they talked about love your enemy, I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me, But as time goes on and you get a little more wisdom behind you, I think it makes a lot more sense. And actually, this happened to me just this past week. Where I work at, I had to give somebody some news. My son-in-law was calling me. Anyway, I had to give somebody some news that they didn't really want to accept. And so they really got kind of belligerent with me, and all of this was over email. And I would respond back to his email and answer the questions he was saying and try to help him to understand, why he was being told this. And every time I would, just within like 5 seconds, he would just shoot something right back to me, and it was, very terse and really just saying I didn't know what I was doing, and the software we had wasn't working correctly. And so I replied back to him, and I said, we've done enough of this back and forth. I think we'd be better off if we just had a conversation. And so I set up a meeting with him, and so we had a phone call, actually a Zoom call. This person was in Oregon, of all places. So, when we got on the phone and I started explaining to him why we're doing what we're doing, and not accusing him or not, acting like he's my enemy, but just helping him to understand, and showing him a little bit of faithfulness. And at the end of the conversation, he actually said, I have enjoyed my conversation with you. And the other thing that he said that was, I thought, really good was he said, if I hadn't have questioned this and kind of made this harder for us, I wouldn't have met you, and I wouldn't have heard what you had to say, and I wouldn't have understood this. And he said, sometimes good things come out of bad things. And so that's something I think we need to always remember, especially today. So then the next, he actually sent me an email after that saying how much he appreciated talking to me. And I actually had to call him back about something else. And he's just good as gold. So anyway, I think that was a good example of treating your enemies with love, even though he wasn't an enemy. But so anyway, back to this. So we move on into chapter 6, and I'm working up something, so just bear with me. The next part of chapter 6 was given to the needy. And I know sometimes it's hard to give to somebody that's standing on the street or somebody that walks up to you, and you have to be careful about that. And you have to call on God to help give you discernment. Should I? Shouldn't I? Is this person taking advantage of me? And certainly I know that for myself, I've worked in Charlotte many, many years, and would be on the street walking to work or walking to the bus, whatever. And I've had a lot of people come up to me and, ask for money or give me some story, and I've given a small handout or something, and I've had people take advantage of me, and I know they did because I know one time I asked, someone was asking for money to get something to eat, and I said, well, come on, we'll get something to eat. And we got up to the register, and, he ordered, and I handed him some money to pay. I was very trusting. And he took that money and dashed just right out. So anyway, that was kind of a disheartening story, but that was on him. And I did what I felt like God was telling me to do, and I just have to turn it over to God, because who knows what would happen after that. I mean, maybe something good came out of that money. I don't know. But that's up to God to work with him on. And so, that came from my heart, even though I got taken advantage of. And I know that happens. So definitely use discernment. Ask God to help you with decisions like that. And, certainly you want to be safe. So getting back here. Jesus continues with how to, actually he gives us an example of how to pray. And does anyone remember what that is? It's in Matthew chapter 6. That's the Lord's Prayer. So God tells us, here's how to pray. So he's given us those instructions. He's given us that advice. And then God talks about fasting and storing up treasures in heaven. And I'm not going into all these because we've heard those. And I'm just trying to, remind you of things that were taking place on the Sermon on the Mount. And then in the last part of chapter 6, he talks about worry and the birds of the air. And God knows that I struggle with that a lot of times. You can ask Pam. I'll wake up at night with what they call it, night sweats, or get something on my mind and just get to worrying about it so bad, and you can't sleep. And every time that happens to me, and it doesn't happen very often anymore, but it used to when I was younger and felt the stress of work and raising a family, things like that. I felt like it happened more. But the only thing that I ever was able to use to calm my nerves down, I guess, was just praying to Jesus and praying to God. And that was the one thing that could always get my heart rate back down. And it really helped me a lot. And in the end, like the next day, I'd work up in my mind all these things. Okay, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this to try to fix whatever's going on. And then the next day comes and you get up and you're in the morning, you're getting ready, and you're like, well, I don't need to do all that. This is not as bad as I thought it was. And so it turns out that, it's never as bad as you build it up in your mind to be. And I certainly found that out, but I still have worries. But I do feel comfort that I can call on Jesus to help me with that. So now we start on chapter 7. And in chapter 7, he starts out with judging others. Oh, I've got some stories on that. And I actually think I told one when we did the men's group, and I was one of the speakers for that. That was kind of a good story. But judging others, ask, seek, and knock. Narrow is the gate that leads to life. And the tree and its fruits, of course, was about watch out for false prophets and those that come in sheep's clothing. And then lastly in this chapter was the wise and foolish builders. So the story, it might seem like it's about building a house that stands, building a house, building a structure. But really, I think it's referencing how we should choose to build our lives, not our house, but our lives, and what foundation we choose to build our life on. And if we dive a little deeper into this, let's see what time it is. Got plenty of time, so y'all are in trouble. I just want to read one on verse 24, the first verse of it. It says, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock." And I've always put the emphasis really on the first part of that, but I believe it's really, let me back up. I always put my emphasis on the last part of that verse, building your house upon the rock. But I think the emphasis really belongs on the first part of that verse. And therefore, who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. I think that's the most important part of that verse. And to me, it's one of the most important parts of that whole parable. Jesus has given us advice, not about building a house, but he's talking about all the things, just like I mentioned in the Sermon on the Mount, because this is the wrap-up of the Sermon on the Mount. He's talking about all those things he's mentioned. And if you follow those, you are the wise one. And as he said, he would add years to your life. And a life anchored in faith and trust in God. The spiritual resilience that stands the test of time. And that one verse, I think, solely wraps up all the parables that he had given before. If we can listen to those our foundation will be built upon a rock. He even told us how to pray. So he gave us so much instruction in the service on the Sermon on the Mount. And certainly I'm not a Bible scholar, but that one verse to me is one of the most powerful verses in the whole Bible, because it sums up so much that he was saying through his parables, through all of his sermons, through his time here on earth. And I think about how God must feel about us at times. It's easier to relate, I think for us, if we look at our children or grandchildren, we give them advice. And I know for myself, I've given my daughters advice, and then within the next day, they turn around and do the complete opposite. So, think about how God looks at us. He gives us advice and gives us the way. And so many times we might not do that. But God is still there for us. Do you remember the "What Would Jesus Do" bracelets we used to have? I think, about everyone had one. What happened to those? They're just kind of a fad and it went away, or they still have those? Anybody? Do you still see those? I don't know that we really do. But anyway, that's something I still think about a lot, and I bet a lot of you do as well, was what would Jesus do in that situation? So that's what we need to relate to a lot of times with, we can give advice, we can take advice, but always look back on what would Jesus do. So still on that one verse, Jesus says, "Hear these words and put them to practice." So if you sum it up, hear and act. How do we hear? Where does the hearing come from? What is he talking about there to me, is what I asked. And, we hear, we gain knowledge from our Bible, we gain knowledge from our preacher, from the men's group, from the ladies' group. My candles went out. Does that mean it's time to stop? Oh, me. So, there's a lot of places we hear and we gather knowledge. And we, like I said before, we have to use discernment from God on how to act, what to follow. But act, like Jesus said, going back to the Beatitudes. I like, when I was thinking about act, and act as God would have you act, I thought about what my mama used to say, act like you got some sense. So she certainly said that to me quite a bit. But, I'm sure Jesus or God is wanting us to act like we have some sense too. Sometimes I'm afraid that, and you can ask Mark or anybody that stands up here, you're preaching and you're trying to, give your all. And believe me, it's not easy being up here. I'm sure you can tell I'm nervous about it. But I used to, was a lay leader back at Porter United Methodist Church back in, 25, 30 years ago. And the first time I got up to speak in front of a congregation, of course I was just like today, nervous and afraid I was going to mess up. And what got me was as I was talking and looking out in the crowd, and you see people. And, now I can't talk about it because I do it too, and sometimes I'm afraid that Pam's going to punch me or something and wake me up, and I'm going to say, "Amen, brother." Because you don't, you're kind of asleep, half asleep. But so wake up, everybody. Anyway, let's get back to this. Oh, I was going to mention this. I asked Pam, I said, what advice do you give me for being up there today? And she said, well, the advice I give you is don't eat too much at men's breakfast and get up there and throw up. So hopefully I'm living a little bit above that so far. So I'm going to try not to. All right, so skipping ahead here, I want to get to, and I'm getting down to the end, so just bear with me. Down at verse 28, and I want to read verse 28 one more time. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as teachers of the law. And like I said, this was kind of the wrap-up of the Sermon on the Mount. And to me, it's kind of like when I played high school football. I know I wasn't big. I was a receiver. I could run fast. But I did play football, ran track, I did other things. But, like in football or soccer or other sports that people have or play, at halftime we might be getting beat to death. I played for South Stanley. We wasn't that good. It was just a small school. But we would go into the locker room at halftime, and, the coach would give us a little bit of instruction and try to make some adjustments on some things. But he always ended, his halftime talk with us, trying to end it on a high point, on, trying to pep us up so that we felt like we could go out and, fight Goliath, just like David did. And I feel sometimes this parable of the wise and foolish builders was a lot like Jesus's talk to pep people up. The Sermon on the Mount's closed, and he's trying to get you ready to go out. And he's saying all those things that I just mentioned and that he talked about on the Service of the Mount were the things he wanted people to remember and to be, energized with and ready to go. And so he's saying, if you can do these things, that you are the wise person with the foundation to go forward and do what, and live in eternity. So, he says, hear these words and put them to practice. And then I'll add, now go out and win in life, just like Jesus would do. And Jesus was trying to fire us up. He was trying to fire them up. So let's get fired up and not sleepy. And don't be, nodding off, but allow his teachings to shape and guide our lives. So hear these words and act. Don't just hear, but also act. Not just act like Mama said and act like you have some sense, but act like God would have you act. With what would Jesus do? And build your life on the foundation of the Sermon on the Mount. It's all right. Let's go. And that's what I have today. So let's see where we're at now. So we'll have our closing hymn. Stand if you can.